I came to Maple Ridge for peace, for roses in the yard, and mornings where sprinklers sang louder than sirens. But peace shattered the day. A man in a cheap polo raised his hand against my wife, in front of neighbors, in front of me. That single crack of sound turned our quiet street into a battlefield. Back then, I didn't know it yet. I thought Maple Ridge meant safety, the kind of quiet built on bicycle wheels and morning birdsong. My name is Armand Hale. After 2 decades of living out of duffel bags and counting sleep in fragments, I wanted mornings with birdsong and evenings on a porch swing. My wife, Lena, wanted roses along the path and a place where we could learn our neighbors' names without squinting at mailbox numbers. For a few soft weeks, we got exactly that. Boxes vanished. Coffee met sunlight. I ran the trail at dawn and waved to the same golden retriever twice on the way back. Lena learned the earth's temperament by touch and coaxed the soil into giving us blooms. The first hairline crack showed on a Sunday. I was jogging home when I saw 3 men in navy polos with HOA security stitched in white. Not police, not anything official I recognized. Still, they wore the posture of borrowed power, utility belts with flashlights, radios that hissed for show, clipboards held like weapons. One stopped in front of a small stucco house and spoke to a young couple about their recycling bins. He wrote something with a flourish and tucked the paper under their doormat. His voice carried too far for a polite reminder. It sounded like a verdict. That night I told Lena what I'd seen. "They're calling themselves security," I said, drying plates at the sink. "They act like they run the street. Did the HOA hire them?" she asked. "I called this afternoon," I said. The office had no idea what I was talking about. No security team. No patrols. "So they're pretending," she said. "Why?" "Because if you wear a badge and talk like a judge, most people won't argue." In the days that followed, the neighborhood offered us whispers like folded notes. Mrs. Ray across the street threatened over porch curtains that didn't match the community palette. The Parker's teen son told to stop playing basketball after 9 and had his ball thrown into the shrubs. The Chens, fake citation notices about shrubs being non-compliant, signed with a made-up title. The same names surfaced for the men in polos, Colt Mercer and 2 shadows who moved when he tilted his chin. People didn't tell their stories loudly. They told them like confessions, and every confession came with the same small shrug that said, "Please don't make it worse." Lena tried to hold to normal. She walked to the mailbox and back with a practiced calm. She baked too much bread and cut it in neighbor portions. Still, I saw how she flinched at a knock that came a beat too late at night, and I hated that our peaceful street could teach her that reflex. When I challenged Colt the first time, it was on a hot Tuesday that made the air shiver. He was circling the Chen's yard with a clipboard. "You work for the HOA?" I asked. "We work for the community," he said, smiling like a billboard. "Someone has to keep order." "I called the actual office," I said. "They don't know your names." He stepped closer, breathed aftershave, and smirked. "They don't have the stomach to enforce the rules." "You don't have the authority," I said. He leaned in. "Careful, Armin, this isn't the military. You don't call the shots here." "I don't need to," I said. "But if you put your hands on anyone on this street, you'll regret it." He laughed. His shadows laughed with him, but his eyes hardened in a way that made my shoulders tighten. That night, Lena said she felt them circling. I told her bullies circle because they hope you'll look away. She nodded and changed the subject, but I could tell she heard footsteps. I didn't. Colt didn't wait long. It happened on a bright Saturday with cicadas buzzing and hose water jetting into sunlight. Lena pulled on her wide-brimmed hat and went to shape the roses along the walkway. I watched from the porch with a glass of iced tea and a promise to myself to let her speak first. The whole point of building a life in a place like Maple Ridge was the right to be left alone. A shadow crossed the grass. "Afternoon," Colt said. He stood too close. His clipboard rode his arm like a badge. His two companions camped near the curb with their arms crossed. "We've got a problem. HOA regulation, 12C, landscaping can't obstruct the path. Those thorns are a hazard." Lena straightened and brushed dirt from her gloves. "Send me the rule in writing from the HOA office," she said. "The real office." "Times change," he said. "We're enforcing now." "You're not security," she said. "You're a man in a polo." His smile didn't move. His eyes did. "Maybe your husband told you you're tough," he said. "But you're not him." She didn't step back. "And you're not authority. You're a bully who bought a costume." The jaw twitch came and went. Then his hand moved. The sound cracked the afternoon. Lena staggered a half step, her palm flying to her cheek. The hose across the street went slack in Mrs. Ray's grip, water pooling into a bright lake on the concrete. Somewhere a basketball stopped bouncing. I put the glass down on the rail. It clicked. "Did you just hit my wife?" I asked. Colt chuckled for the crowd. A performance for his two men and for every camera lens that might be pointed our way. "She was out of line," he said. "Rules need consequences." "You want consequences," I said, crossing the lawn. "Here they are. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I took his wrist and showed his elbow where it was designed to bend." Grass met knees. The clipboard rattled across the walk. The first shadow lunged. He swung like he was used to people backing away. I wasn't. I turned his momentum into a roll and let the ground teach him breathlessness. The second grabbed from behind, fingers scrambling for leverage. I found his balance and took it from him. He hit the grass with a sound that carried farther than I expected. "Stop!" Mrs. Ray called. "Someone call the police." Phones were already out. The street had become a theater. I kept my focus tight. No extra strikes. No anger I wouldn't defend later. Colt tried to twist free. I settled my weight and lowered my voice. "You're finished," I said. "You will not touch her again. You will not touch anyone here again." "You think people will thank you?" he hissed. "You don't know who you're messing with." "You don't know who we are," I said. I lifted my head and let him see what I meant. Neighbors watching, shoulders squared. Fear thinning out like fog. Lena's fingers grazed my sleeve. I didn't look, but I felt the world return to its shape around her. Sirens began as a rumor at the far end of the street and grew until blue and red light licked the corner like dawn arriving wrong. Colt's smile dried up. One of his men cradled his wrist and tried to look brave. The other stared at the grass as if it had betrayed him. When the cruisers turned in, doors opened in a practice sequence. An officer scanned the scene. A woman with a reddened cheek, a man in a polo pinned to the lawn, two accomplices winded and confused, and me. Steady, hands visible, eyes on the person who had made our quiet into a weapon. Before an officer could ask, voices rose. "He slapped her," Mrs. Ray said, pointing. "They've been faking HOA authority for weeks," Mr. Chen added. "They threatened our boy," the Parkers said, voices overlapping. I let go of Colt and stepped back, palms open. Lena stood to my right. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She looked at the officers and said, "He hit me." Her voice was clear as glass. The blue lights painted our windows. The badges shone for real this time. A deputy tugged at Colt's plastic ID, frowned, and slid it into a bag. His belt badge followed. The street exhaled. It sounded like the first breath after surfacing. I wrapped an arm around Lena's shoulders. Her cheek was hot against my knuckles. She leaned in, just enough to tell me I'd done the right thing, and that she was still standing, and that the story of our quiet wasn't over. Not today, not here, not on this street we had chosen because we believed peace could be grown, tended, and defended when someone tried to trample it. The police cruisers pulled away with Colt and his two shadows inside, their false badges bagged as evidence. The street remained lit with the afterglow of flashing lights, and for the first time since we had moved into Maple Ridge, the neighbors didn't drift back indoors when the commotion ended. They lingered on porches, on driveways, arms folded across chests not in fear, but in solidarity. It was as though we all realized together that silence had been the imposter's shield, and that shield had just shattered. Lena stood beside me, holding an ice pack against her cheek. I asked softly, "Do you want to go inside?" She shook her head. "No, I want them to see me still standing." Her resolve put iron in my spine. She didn't want to retreat. She wanted to claim our ground. Mrs. Ray walked over with a tray of lemonade, her hand trembling only slightly. "I think we should talk," she said, her voice catching in the humid evening air. One by one, others joined. Mr. Chen, the Parkers, the young couple from down the street. We gathered at the end of my driveway as though it were a town square, a council born out of urgency. Everyone had a story, and once the first was spoken, the rest poured out like water through a broken dam. "They told me my curtains weren't regulation," Mrs. Ray confessed. When I argued, one of them leaned in and said, "Nice house. Would be a shame if anything happened to it." Mr. Chen added, "They fined us $300 for overgrown shrubs. We paid because, well, they carried themselves like people with power, and we didn't want trouble." The Parkers shared how their teenage son had been humiliated. "He loves basketball," Mrs. Parker said, her voice shaking with the ache of a mother. "Those men took his ball, said it was disturbing the peace, and threw it into the bushes. He hasn't played outside since." Each story came with the same undertone. Fear wrapped in shame, the helplessness of being cornered in your own sanctuary. I listened, jaw tight, every detail like tinder on a fire that refused to be ignored. Lena spoke at last. "We came here for quiet," she said, her cheeks still red. "But quiet doesn't mean silence in the face of abuse. They thrived because we didn't talk to each other. Tonight, that ends." The murmurs of agreement turned into nods, then into a shared determination. For the first time, I saw not a collection of houses, but a community. That night, we exchanged phone numbers. A group chat was born. We made plans to meet again, formally, to decide how we'd protect ourselves until the legal process ran its course. People smiled at one another more freely, even laughed softly as if rediscovering the permission to breathe. When Lena and I finally went inside, the house felt different. The walls no longer echoed with isolation. They hummed with the knowledge that we weren't alone anymore. But rest didn't come easily. At 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of Lena pacing near the window. The blinds were tilted open just enough for her to watch the street. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "They'll come back," she whispered. "People like that don't just disappear because the police drive them away." I joined her at the window. The cul-de-sac was calm under the glow of streetlights. "If they do, they'll find us ready," I said. She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "I hate that I'm scared in my own home." I kissed her hair. "Fear is natural. But fear isn't weakness. What we do with it, that's what matters." The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with cautious energy. Porch lights stayed on longer. Conversations that once ended with polite nods now carried on across fences. People who had hidden their anxiety now spoke it openly, and in that openness, it began to lose its grip. By evening, we held our first official meeting in Mr. Chen's garage. Folding chairs scraped concrete. Kids chased each other around parked cars until they were pulled close and told to listen. We weren't experts in organizing, but necessity makes fast learners. "We need to file official complaints," Mr. Chen said, passing around printed forms he had already downloaded. "If we each submit our experiences, the police will have more to work with." "We also need to watch out for each other," Lena added. "Not just assume someone else will handle it. If you see something strange, call it out. Call us. I suggested we rotate night walks. Not patrols, nothing official. Just neighbors walking dogs, taking evening strolls, making our presence known. Predators thrive in shadows. Light and eyes make them stumble." Mrs. Ray lifted her chin. "They made me feel small. But I'm not small. None of us are. We forgot that until tonight." The room filled with the quiet hum of agreement. That hum was more powerful than shouting. It was the sound of unity forming its roots. Still, beneath the optimism I sensed unease. People kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to creak open and reveal Colt's smirk. Fear doesn't vanish in one night. It lingers like smoke after a fire. But smoke clears. When Lena and I walked home, she slipped her hand into mine. "Do you think this will hold?" she asked. "It will," I said. "Because we've decided it will. And because people like Colt only win when we stay silent." The cicadas buzzed again, as though trying to stitch the world back into normal. But nothing would be normal again. Our neighborhood was awake now. And awake communities are not easy prey. Days passed with a strange new rhythm. Maple Ridge, once a place of unspoken worries and drawn curtains, now pulsed with watchfulness. Porch lights flicked on at dusk, not from fear, but from intention. Neighbors who had once nodded politely in passing now waved with warmth, lingered on sidewalks, and checked in on one another with ease. The sense of community felt stronger, but so did the undercurrent of unease. Because deep down, we all knew Colt Mercer wasn't finished. The police had taken him away, yes, but men like him rarely vanish quietly. He was the kind of person who saw power not as a privilege but as something to be seized at any cost. And people like that, they come back. I carried this thought like a weight as I went about my days. At work, I found myself distracted, scrolling news articles to see if charges had been filed. At night, I double-checked locks I had once ignored. Lena tried to keep busy, planting herbs by the kitchen window, but I caught her eyes drifting toward the street more often than not. One Thursday evening, I was pulling weeds in the front yard when Mr. Parker crossed the street with his son trailing behind. The boy carried a basketball, held close to his chest like something precious. "Evening, Armin," Parker said, shifting awkwardly. "Thought you should know. We saw a black SUV circling twice this morning." "Didn't recognize it," my chest tightened. "Did you get a plate?" "Too far," he said, "but it felt familiar." He glanced at his son, who looked at the ground. "He thinks it was one of Colt's men," the boy whispered. "I recognize the driver. The one who grabbed me that night. The one who took my ball." Anger flared hot in my stomach. I crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. "Thank you for telling me," I said gently. "You did the right thing. And if you ever see them again, you come straight to me or your parents. Understand?" He nodded, clutching the ball tighter. When they left, I sat on the porch steps, sweat prickling my neck. Colt wasn't done. He was probing, testing, reminding us that his shadow still stretched over our street. That night, our neighborhood group chat lit up. Reports of strange cars, unfamiliar footsteps at odd hours, even a couple of doors knocked without explanation. Nothing concrete, nothing the police could act on, but enough to tell us one thing: he was still out there. The following Saturday, we held our second meeting, this time in our backyard. Folding chairs ringed the fire pit. Citronella candles warding off mosquitoes and, perhaps symbolically, the remnants of fear. I stood, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes. "They're trying to rattle us," I began, "testing to see if we'll fold. But we don't bend anymore. "We face this together," Lena added. "We can't live in fear of what might happen. We can only prepare for when it does." Voices rose in agreement. Mr. Chen suggested security cameras. The Parkers offered to organize walking groups in pairs. Mrs. Ray volunteered to set up a hotline so anyone could call quickly if something suspicious happened. It wasn't professional. It wasn't perfect. But it was ours. A patchwork of defenses stitched together by ordinary people who had decided enough was enough. Still, a part of me worried we were painting targets on our backs. Bullies feed on attention, and Colt would hate nothing more than to see us united. My worry proved right sooner than I expected. It was just after midnight when Lena shook me awake. Her whisper cut through the haze of sleep. "Armand, someone's outside." I grabbed a flashlight and moved to the window. Sure enough, the faint outline of a figure lingered near the curb. A second shape joined it, then a third. My pulse quickened. "Stay here," I told Lena, pulling on a jacket. She caught my arm. "Don't go alone." I kissed her hand, then slipped out the front door. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of damp grass. I clicked the flashlight on and aimed it at the street. 3 men stood in a loose triangle. Colt wasn't there, but I recognized the swagger in their stance. "What do you want?" I called, voice steady. One smirked. "Just checking in on the neighborhood." "This neighborhood doesn't need you," I said. "Funny," another answered. "We hear it's gotten restless since our boss was taken in. Thought we'd remind folks who's really in charge." Behind me, a door opened. Mrs. Ray stepped onto her porch, phone in hand. Then the Chens, then the Parkers. Lights blinked on one by one like lanterns across the street. The men shifted uncomfortably, their confidence faltering in the face of so many eyes. "You should leave," I said, taking a step forward. "Before you make a mistake you can't undo." They muttered something under their breath and retreated to their SUV, tires squealing as they sped off into the night. I turned and saw Lena, framed in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "They're testing us," she said. "Yes," I replied. "And tonight we showed them we won't be broken." The neighbors gathered in my yard, voices hushed but steady. We knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a longer fight. But for the first time, I felt certainty in my bones. Colt Mercer had underestimated Maple Ridge, and underestimating us would be his downfall. The night after the SUV sped away, sleep was scarce for the whole neighborhood. Maple Ridge had changed forever, and there was no pretending otherwise. We had stood together once, twice, but everyone sensed the storm wasn't over. Colt Mercer wasn't a man who surrendered quietly. I spent the next morning tightening the small defenses we had put in place, checking that our new security cameras were working, walking the perimeter of our yard, making sure the gates latched tight. Lena brewed coffee but hardly drank it. Her eyes drifted to the window every few minutes, as though expecting shadows to take shape on the lawn. By afternoon, the neighborhood group chat was buzzing. The Chens had spotted the black SUV parked at the entrance to Maple Ridge. Mr. Parker swore he saw 2 men walking past his house at dawn, heads down, as though mapping the street. The tension grew with each report. Finally, Mrs. Ray sent a message. "We can't live like this. We need to act." That evening, we gathered again, this time in the Parkers' garage bigger than Mr. Chen's and stocked with folding chairs borrowed from half the street. The kids were told to stay inside. Candles flickered on a makeshift table. I stood up, feeling the weight of everyone's unease. They want us to cower, to go back to silence. But that's not who we are anymore. Mrs. Ray raised her hand. "The police arrested Colt once. Why isn't he still behind bars?" "Bail," Mr. Chen answered grimly. "Men like him find ways to slip through cracks." Lena leaned forward, her voice steady. "Then we close the cracks. We document everything. We keep records. We show the authorities that this isn't a misunderstanding. It's harassment, organized and targeted. The more evidence we have, the less room they have to dismiss us." The neighbors nodded, murmurs of agreement swelling into conviction. The plan grew piece by piece. Cameras positioned to catch plates, logs of suspicious activity, patrols done in pairs to ensure safety. We were building a wall, not of bricks, but of vigilance and solidarity. That night, as Lena and I walked home under the halo of streetlights, she slipped her hand into mine. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "that maybe we should have chosen somewhere else? Somewhere without all this?" I squeezed her hand. "We didn't choose this fight, but we choose how to end it. Running would only teach them they can drive anyone out." She looked at me, her cheek healed but her eyes holding the memory. "I'm not leaving. Not after what they did. This is our home now, and I won't let them steal it." The following week tested every word we'd spoken. The SUV returned, sometimes idling at corners, sometimes vanishing as soon as phones came out. Strange knocks came at odd hours, though no one was ever at the door when we checked. Even the mailboxes bore traces of tampering. It was harassment in fragments, small enough to frustrate, never big enough for immediate arrests. Still, each incident fueled our resolve. Mrs. Ray's new camera caught one of Colt's men leaning on her fence. The Parkers logged the SUV's plate numbers. The Chens recorded conversations with the fake enforcers who tried to corner them at the grocery store. Piece by piece, the case was building. Then came the breaking point. It was a Wednesday evening when Lena went to water the roses. I was inside, finishing a call, when I heard her shout. I ran to the porch and froze. Colt himself was back, leaning against the gate with that same smug smile. "Evening," he said smoothly. "Miss me?" Lena stood tall, hose in hand, but I could see the tremor in her grip. I strode down the path, every step fueled by weeks of pressure. "You're trespassing," I said flatly. He chuckled. "This whole neighborhood, it's mine. Always has been. You think a couple of cameras and scared neighbors will change that?" "They're not scared anymore," I said. "Not of you," he tilted his head. "Funny, because I remember the look on her face when I cut him off. Say another word about my wife, and I'll make sure you regret it." For a moment his mask slipped and I saw the raw anger underneath. But before it could boil over, a sound broke the standoff. Doors opening, footsteps gathering. One by one, neighbors emerged, phones raised, cameras pointed. The Parkers, the Chens, Mrs. Ray, even the boy with the basketball. Colt glanced around, realizing the circle wasn't his anymore. "You think this ends with your little community watch?" He sneered. "This ends," I said firmly, "when you're gone for good. And this time, you won't talk your way out." The police arrived faster than before. Maybe it was the calls flooding in from every house. Maybe it was the urgency in our voices. Officers stepped out, hands ready, eyes sharp. Colt tried to bluff, but the evidence against him was too thick now. His threats, his men, his fraud, it was all recorded, logged, undeniable. When they cuffed him again, the street erupted in relief. Children clapped. Adults hugged. Lena leaned against me, her breath shaky but proud. Still, as Colt was shoved into the cruiser, he twisted his neck to glare at us. His words cut through the night. "This isn't over. You can't erase me." The SUV carrying him vanished down the road, red and blue lights trailing. The neighbors lingered, basking in victory, but I felt the echo of his warning in my chest. This wasn't the final chapter. Not yet. When Colt's SUV disappeared into the dark that night, the street hummed with a kind of victory we hadn't known we needed. Neighbors lingered long past bedtime, children running circles around our ankles, adults speaking in low, relieved voices. For the first time, Maple Ridge felt alive with more than just suspicion. It was alive with courage. But as the crowd thinned and porch lights flickered out one by one, I knew the battle wasn't over. Colt's glare as the cruiser door shut was still etched into my mind, his promise echoing like a stain. The following days brought a blur of interviews and statements. Detectives visited our homes, reviewed footage, logged testimonies. The case against Colt was stronger than ever. Fraud, assault, impersonating officials, harassment. The kind of charges that don't vanish with a fine or a warning. Yet part of me couldn't rest. Men like him had connections, ways of slipping through cracks ordinary people didn't see. Lena caught me staring out the window one night, jaw tight. "You're still waiting for him," she said softly. "I'm waiting for quiet," I answered. She touched my arm, grounding me. "We already found it. Not the old quiet, the new kind. The one we built together." Her words sank deep. She was right. We hadn't come here to fight, but once the fight found us, we hadn't stood alone. And that made all the difference. Weeks passed. Court dates were set. The black SUV never returned. The tension that had gripped our neighborhood slowly loosened its hold. The group chat that once buzzed with warnings began to fill with recipes, babysitting swaps, jokes about who mowed their lawn crooked. It was as if we had reclaimed more than safety. We had reclaimed community. One Saturday, the Parkers hosted a block party in their driveway. Folding tables sagged with potluck dishes. Music drifted from a speaker. Children chalked hopscotch squares on the pavement. Mrs. Ray laughed louder than I'd ever heard her, her lemonade famous now for all the right reasons. Lena nudged me as we watched. "Look," she said, nodding toward the boy with the basketball. He was dribbling again, sneakers squeaking against asphalt, his grin wide and unburdened. My chest tightened, but this time from something good. When the sun dipped low, neighbors gathered in a circle. Someone suggested we make the block party an annual tradition. Others agreed. It wasn't just about food and music. It was about a promise that we wouldn't slip back into silence, that we would hold on to what we'd learned. As the laughter carried into the night, I finally felt my shoulders loosen. Maple Ridge wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was ours. Defended not by fences or cameras, but by people who refused to look away when it mattered most. Later, when the crowd had gone home and Lena and I sat on our porch swing, she leaned against me. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. I took a long breath. The cicadas sang. The stars burned steady above. Maybe Colt meant what he said, that he'd never disappear completely. But that's not the point anymore. He doesn't own the fear here. He doesn't own us, she smiled faintly. We do. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, letting the rhythm of the night settle into me. For years, I'd fought wars on foreign soil. I'd thought I'd left battles behind when I chose this street, this house, this quiet. But sometimes peace isn't something you stumble upon. Sometimes peace is something you earn. Together, with neighbors who become more than strangers, with a wife who refuses to bow her head, with a community that learns its strength only when tested. The roses swayed in the breeze, their thorns sharp, their petals resilient. Lena had coaxed them into bloom with patience and care. I realized then that our neighborhood had done the same. We had been tested, cut, pushed down, but we had risen, stronger, brighter. I looked out over Maple Ridge, the driveways empty, the porches warm with light. And I felt it at last, not the old quiet, brittle and fragile, but a new one, solid and alive. And in that quiet, I whispered to myself, we are home.